Last is prepared to deliver a verdict on marijuana and mental illness.
One morning, teenager Chris Martin smoked a few joints. Later, this happened.
I was supposed to call a friend, and I called her and I felt like something was wrong with her. I didn't know what, I don't know why I thought it, but I arranged to meet her at Flinders Street. So I get there and she wasn't anywhere to be seen, so I just started freaking out and I just panicked. I started seeing dead bodies everywhere, like in pools of blood. You know, they're just everywhere you look. Everyone around is just going about their usual day, you know, just walking by as if there's nothing there.
It was a terrifying psychotic episode. But was the marijuana the cause?
Even 5 years ago, the jury was still out on whether cannabis causes psychosis. Well, that's all changed. The data have been flooding in. Scientists can now not only tell you it does, they can tell you how it happens and who is at risk.
The idea cannabis sends people mad isn't new. That was the message of Reefer Madness, a 1930s cautionary tale.
The weed marijuana is grown in every state in the Union. Recently, in the city of Brooklyn, New York,
By the 70s, cannabis was seen as cool. Consumption rose. And even many future doctors considered it a harmless lifestyle herb.
I remember about 5 years ago I was giving a talk to a room full of my colleagues on the link between cannabis use and psychosis, and one of them became so irate that he walked up to the stage and hurled abuse at me. So it did seem like heresy at the time.
And the critics had a good point. If cannabis caused psychosis, how come as consumption increased over the years, schizophrenia rates hadn't? But it turned out no one had really checked. In 2004, a London study found the truth. Schizophrenia rates have been rising in parallel with cannabis use.
So this killed one of the main criticisms.
It did. And a second study coming out of Zurich actually showed the same thing.
Still, that was just 2 studies. The clincher came last year. Scientists decided to run what's known as a meta-analysis. That's where they take all the research from all over the world and combine the data.
The conclusion, published in the world's most prestigious medical journal, The Lancet, couldn't be more clear. Smoking pot at any stage increased your risk of developing a psychotic illness by 40%. What's more, the heavier you used, the higher the risk. And while the risk to an individual is still low, with so many people using cannabis, the impact overall is substantial.
Yeah, the meta-analysis showed that if you removed cannabis from the schizophrenia equation, so if people didn't use cannabis, then about 1 in 10 people who developed a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia wouldn't develop the disorder.
One of the scariest experiences of my life. You know, it just got so much for me, I actually pulled a knife on someone. I have no idea why. The cops intervened and sent me to hospital.
It's now clear the trigger for Chris's psychosis was his use of cannabis. The question is, why? It turns out marijuana doesn't act like other drugs. In the late 90s, scientists discovered something completely unexpected. Every one of us has a natural cannabis system in our brains. It's one of our major signalling processes, and that's what the active ingredient in dope is tapping into. When Chris had his psychotic episode, this is what was happening to him. The marijuana smoke released its active ingredient, THC, which entered his brain, locked onto a cannabinoid receptor, and opened the floodgates on a potent neurotransmitter, dopamine. Unlike our natural internal cannabis, which breaks down quickly, the THC stayed there, holding the gate open, flooding the brain with dopamine, right in an area linked with psychosis.
This is where dopamine is pumped out into the midbrain. In fact, too much dopamine in this area is called the wind of psychotic fire.
Really?
Yeah.
What a great name.
And antipsychotic medications block dopamine in this region and ameliorate psychotic symptoms.
Okay, so the mechanism is actually really clear that this is how the cannabis causes psychosis.
It is.
But if that's true, how come so few cannabis users become psychotic? 1/3 of Australians have tried marijuana, yet only 1% of the population has schizophrenia. Who are the people at risk? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, was discovered in a picturesque corner of South Island, New Zealand. Dunedin is home to one of the world's best longitudinal studies. Since 1972, they've been subjecting a group of 1,000 people to a barrage of tests and questions. In 2005, they announced an astonishing discovery: a gene for vulnerability to cannabis.
The gene we looked at is called the catechol-methyltransferase gene, or COMT for short. And then we looked at that particular gene because we know that it stands out in families whose members have schizophrenia.
And what does this COMT gene do? Well, as it happens, it regulates our old friend, dopamine. Let's say these are the COMT genes. This is the good gene, this is the bad gene. Now, everyone gets two, so you could have two good genes, one of each. But if you get two bad genes, well, it seems your ability to regulate dopamine is impaired. Which might not matter unless you smoke cannabis.
We found that among adolescents who had used cannabis on a monthly basis or more, who had the bad version of the gene, their chances of developing psychosis by the mid-20s were increased 11-fold.
11-fold? That's extraordinary.
It is. So this explains why the use of cannabis